Hi, this is Sam Weigel with Flying Magazine's web series V1 Rotate. You may have noticed we were on a short hiatus in November and December. That's because my wife Dawn and I were off adventuring in New Zealand for a month. We had a fantastic trip, but I gotta say the highlight was exploring the South Island by air with a Cessna 172. We got a ton of great footage. That's going to make for an awesome special episode next month. Look for it on February 16th. Now, in the meantime, in January, I'm leading a 10-person dirt bike trip to Mexico's Baja Peninsula. In the course of planning this trip, I've come across a bunch of previously unused footage and photos from our flying trip to Baja in 2016. Now, up until now, V1 Rotate has been largely focused on new and aspiring professional pilots, but I think our content for the next 2 months will be of interest to all pilots, aviation enthusiasts, and those who just love a good adventure. Enjoy this special episode of V1 Rotate, flying Mexico's Baja Peninsula. Our tale begins 11 years ago, in February of 2013, when my friend Brad and I embarked on one of our many motorcycle trips together, this time a dirt bike adventure down Baja, California. Our plan was to ride from San Diego to Cabo San Lucas and back in 2 weeks. That probably would have been optimistic even if things went to plan. They did not go to plan. Brad was riding a Honda XR650, a mainstay of the Baja off-road scene and generally considered bulletproof. Well, Brad had bought this one off of Craigslist sight unseen, and it gave him problems from the get-go. Our issues with the Big Red Pig came to a head on the 8th day of our trip when the top end blew a few miles outside of the little village of San Ignacio, population 700 and miles from anywhere. Within hours of our arrival, everyone in town knew who we were, and many were generous in offering help and hospitality. Over the next 6 days, we settled into life in San Ignacio, used a local contact to source used parts from 100 miles away, and found a shade tree mechanic to put the Big Red Pig back together. On our last day in town, though, we decided it would be silly to spend all this time in San Ignacio without going to see the California gray whales. And so we rode 2 up 40 miles out to Laguna San Ignacio, the winter breeding and calving grounds for over 500 California gray whales. Their 12,000 mile round trip between here and the Bering Sea is the longest annual migration of all mammals. The whalers who almost drove gray whales to extinction in the mid-19th century called them devilfish for their aggressive defense, but these days the whales of Laguna San Ignacio are known for their friendly and curious interactions with humans. When Brad and I arrived at the Laguna, we ran into Valentin, a fisherman we had met on our first day in San Ignacio. He invited us out on his 21-foot open panga, where we soon had an incredible 65-minute encounter with 2 whales who simply would not leave us alone. Every time we splashed the ocean, they rose to our little panga, nudging it and rubbing their backs on it, then sticking their snouts in the air for us to pet and even kiss them. Then they'd roll over to get a nice scratch under the chin like some great shaggy gray dog of the sea, or raise their dinner plate-sized eyes to meet ours, or give those of us who weren't paying attention a good soaking with their blowhole. They turned us all into, well, blubbering idiots. It was impossible not to feel a powerful connection with these majestic creatures. It was the experience of a lifetime, and I owed it all to my friend's lemon of a dirt bike blowing its top end into the middle of nowhere. Of course, as soon as Brad and I told our wives about our whale encounter, they were begging us to take them to Baja so they could pet a whale too. But Laguna San Ignacio is a long ways from anywhere. It does have a dirt airstrip though, which got me thinking that it would be a great destination for a Baja flying adventure. Our chance came in 2016 when my wife Dawn and I were flying our 1953 Piper Pacer around the outer circumference of the United States, retracing a 15,000-mile motorcycle trip that I had made several years prior. It was a farewell tour for the plane since we had recently decided to sell everything, buy a sailboat, and spend a few years cruising the Bahamas and the Caribbean. By mid-February, the plane was stashed in Phoenix, an ideal staging ground for a long weekend flying around Baja. Meanwhile, Brad found a Cessna 182 for rent in San Diego that, unusually, came with permission and paperwork to be taken into Mexico. The 182 had enough useful load that, by packing lightly, Brad and Amber were also able to bring our mutual friend Eric and his girlfriend Colleen. On February 12th, I flew the Pacer into Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, which has to be one of the most GA-friendly Class Bravo airports around. Dawn took Delta in from Minneapolis that night, and we set out for Mexico early the next morning. Our route threaded the restricted areas southwest of Phoenix and landed at Yuma to top off on cheap fuel and file our international VFR flight plan. After takeoff, we crossed the border at the time indicated on our flight plan, then passed over the Colorado River Delta at the head of the Sea of Cortez. From there, we followed Baja's eastern coastline to San Felipe, a popular GA port of entry. Brad, Amber, Eric, and Colleen arrived from San Diego within a few minutes of us. Mexican customs and immigration procedures, including entry permits for the planes, took about 30 minutes. Everyone was quite friendly and helpful. We topped off our tanks in San Felipe, as there is no avgas all the way to Laredo, and the Pacer in particular was somewhat range limited. From San Felipe, we worked our way south along the coastline. There is relative civilization until Gonzaga Bay, where Brad's Big Red Pig had first given us trouble on the third day of our dirt bike trip. Here, the roads turn inland, and the terrain is quite rough, with only a few fishing villages and beach camps. Most of Baja is very sparsely populated, which is a lot of the appeal. But this means you need to be self-sufficient with a good survival kit, extra water and fuel, and a satellite communicator like a Spot or Garmin InReach. It's nearly 300 nautical miles from San Felipe to our destination for the night, Mulegé. About two-thirds of the way there, we spied Punta San Francisquito, a former resort that's connected to the outside world by a long, sandy, and rough dirt track. It also has a fairly long dirt airstrip, but its license is expired, making its use a legal gray area. It appeared to have been used recently and was in good condition, and we didn't see the military or anyone else around, so we landed to take a physiological break and a look around. It's a beautiful spot, and it's a shame that the Mexican Aviation Authority, AFAC, hasn't been more proactive about renewing airstrip licenses for places like this. Continuing south, we had some more fun with formation flying and taking photos of each other's airplanes. Finally, at 2 p.m. after a long day of flying over 500 nautical miles, we approached the 3,600-foot El Gallito airstrip just south of the Highway 1 oasis town of Mulegé. This is the home of Hotel Serenidad. Land on runway 34, dodge a few potholes, taxi to the gate at the end, and you're there. Built in the 50s, this was once one of John Wayne's favorite Baja hangouts. It's still a really nice stopping point and a bit of a throwback with clean basic rooms, cold beer, and tasty grub, all at pretty reasonable prices. We departed Mulegé early the next morning, following Highway 1 south to Laredo. This was a bit out of our way, but we needed avgas, and anyways, it made for a nice flight down the placid Bahia Concepcion. Laredo has an air traffic control tower, so we had to close our 2-day flight plan from San Felipe and open a 3-day flight plan north to Ensenada. Yeah, flight plans work a bit different in Mexico. Full of avgas, we departed to the northwest, over the mountains surrounding the 18th century Mission San Francisco Javier that Brad and I had explored on our trip after getting the Big Red Pig working again. Laredo was where we ran out of time and flew back to the US on the airlines, Brad managing to sell the Big Red Pig to another passenger while we were waiting to board the flight. A few weeks later, I flew back and had an epic off-road solo ride to Cabo San Lucas, where I sold my DRZ 400 to a gringo doing the ride the other way. This time, Laredo was as far south as we'd get. Our destination for the day was Laguna San Ignacio, where the girls and Eric were all hoping to repeat mine and Brad's whale petting experience. Past the mountains, we flew over a landscape of mesas and canyons. It looked like dirt biking heaven. And then things got rather sandy, and right about the time the Laguna's 4,000-foot dirt airstrip appeared, the GoPro died. Don't worry, I made a great landing. A van picked us up and brought us to Kima Eco Resort, which, as the name implies, is a very off-the-grid, natural living sort of place. Normally, Kima runs 4-day, 3-night whale-watching packages, often for clients flown in via chartered Cessna Caravan, but they had a couple of extra bungalows for Valentine's Day and were able to accommodate us. We excitedly ate our gourmet lunch, listening to the other guests recount their whale encounters from the morning excursion, then headed out to the shoreline for the afternoon session. It was a gorgeous warm sunny day on the Laguna, and good vibes abounded on our panga. We were all sure we'd have great luck with the whales, and of course expectations had been set impossibly high by mine and Brad's incredible whale tale from 3 years prior. And indeed, there were plenty of whales around, some of which got quite close, some of which came up to other boats to be petted, but none got close enough to us. The whales are protected, and the rather sensible rule of the lagoon is that you don't chase the whales, they have to come to you. The boatmen say this only happens on maybe one trip out of 4, and lengthy encounters like the one Brad and I had in 2013 are quite rare. This time, we got skunked. The mood was subdued on the ride back to Kima. We spent the late afternoon bicycling and kayaking and deciding to push back our departure the next day so we could get in another try with the whales. Despite a rather bleak and windy morning, the sun soon shone on the lagoon and on the girls' chance of petting a whale. A large female with a young calf surfaced near us, and Mama stood watch while her young progeny made a beeline for our boat. Dawn, Amber, Colleen, and Eric all petted the youngster in turn, exclaiming at the softness of its skin while I snapped photos. It was a pretty special moment. Mission accomplished, we headed north just after lunch. Past Guerrero Negro, the Pacific coastline gets very wild and lonely. We followed the shoreline and Dawn and I spotted several migrating gray whales from altitude. After an hour of total desolation, we rejoined civilization in the form of Highway 1 cutting out toward the coast after a long stretch through the scenic but desolate high desert around Catavina. This is San Quintin, home to another old Baja landmark, the Old Mill Hotel. We landed at the nearby Campo Lorenzo airstrip, which was partially flooded from recent rains, leaving about 1,500 feet usable runway. The airstrip actually belongs to a private RV resort, but they were okay with us using it while staying at the Old Mill, and the owner even gave me a ride to a nearby Pemex station to fill my jerry cans with premium ethanol-free Pemex Rojo. We had a nice evening lounging by the calm lagoon, recounting the trip and enjoying our last dinner together. Well, theoretically. It was definitely Dawn's last night, as she had to get back to Minnesota, but the rest of us had an extra day to play with. This set up a rather crazy sequence of events the next day, when Dawn and I flew to Ensenada to check out of Mexico and file an international flight plan, then up to San Diego's Brown Field to check into the US and drop Dawn off to airline home, and then I filed another international flight plan and flew back to Ensenada, checking into Mexico again. I was getting pretty used to the international thing by now. For all that, Ensenada had a couple of cruise ships in town, and it was kind of a shit show. It wasn't nearly as charming as when Brad and I had spent a night there in 2013 at the very start of our dirt biking trip. And that was that. We flew up to San Diego the next day, Eric hitching a ride in the Pacer. At Brown Field, Brad said goodbye to the 182, I said goodbye to Brad and crew, they headed home, and I headed out to Catalina Island for lunch with a friend. Today, 8 years later, our 5-day weekend flying Baja ranks among my most favorite flying adventures. I hope to get our Stinson 108 back down there within the next few years. In the meantime, I'm really excited for this dirt bike trip. Brad will be on it, along with some other old and new flying and non-flying friends, and all 3 of my brothers. As an American, I feel really fortunate to have such a beautiful, adventurous place right on our own doorstep. If you have your own airplane, or if you can get permission to bring one into Mexico, I highly recommend flying down and experiencing Baja for yourself. In my next written installment of V1 Rotate on January 19th, I'll cover border crossing practicalities. And then on February 16th, look for my next video episode, Flying New Zealand. As always, thanks for watching V1 Rotate, and for more great flying content, join me here at flyingmag.com every first and third Friday of the month.